Think Roman emperors were fearless gods in togas, strutting through marble halls, commanding armies, and living their best wine-drenched lives. Think again. Because while some of them were out conquering the world, others were hiding in closets, whispering to statues, and executing houseplants they thought were spies. You're about to dive into the 6 most dangerously paranoid Roman emperors, so suspicious, so unhinged, and so deathly afraid of betrayal. They basically turned the Roman Empire into a murder mystery dinner party where everyone dies before dessert. We're talking about emperors who poisoned their food tasters just in case they were planning to betray them. Emperors who built secret tunnels just to avoid eye contact. Emperors who banned certain words, colors, and facial expressions because they might be code for "kill the emperor." These guys didn't just rule with an iron fist, they ruled with trembling hands, a dagger under the pillow, and 24/7 PTSD from imaginary conspiracies. This isn't just a history lesson, it's a descent into the sweaty, sleepless, nightmare-fueled minds of men who made paranoia a political philosophy. Let's begin with one of the OG anxiety addicts of ancient Rome. 1. Tiberius, the emperor who trusted no one, not even his own mum. Tiberius didn't start off completely insane, which makes it even scarier how far he spiraled. Born into the imperial family, he was never supposed to be emperor. But when Augustus needed a backup plan that wasn't a toddler, Tiberius was dragged into power like a moody teenager forced into a group project, and he hated it. At first, Tiberius ruled with a vibe best described as reluctant bureaucrat with a murder quota. But then he started seeing shadows, not real ones, but metaphorical traitors lurking in every corridor, every dinner guest, and probably every wine goblet. He was so obsessed with betrayal that he built an elite squad of secret police, the delatores, whose entire job was to eavesdrop, report rumors, and get people executed for breathing suspiciously. At one point, simply making a toast to someone not named Tiberius was enough to get your head separated from your shoulders. And speaking of separation, he eventually separated himself from Rome altogether, retreating to a pleasure palace on the island of Capri, which sounds fun until you realize it was basically a fortified anxiety bunker surrounded by cliffs, guards, and an ocean-sized moat. From Capri, Tiberius ran the empire like a paranoid Bond villain. Visitors were watched, letters were opened, and even clouds that looked like daggers were probably interrogated. He stopped trusting everyone, family, friends, advisors, and replaced them with yes-men and professional snitches. The worst part? He was probably right to be paranoid. Plots against him did exist, but by the end, no one could tell the difference between a real conspiracy and Tiberius's latest fever dream. When he died, people were so happy they threw parties in the streets, which tells you everything you need to know. 2. Caligula, the guy who made paranoia sexy, violent, and very, very weird. If Tiberius was paranoid like your overprotective uncle, Caligula was paranoid like a coked-up rock star with a knife collection. Historians still argue about whether Caligula was insane, possessed, poisoned, or just really into chaos. But what's clear is that he turned the Roman Empire into his own personal horror movie, and everyone else was a potential threat, a pawn, or a soon-to-be victim. He started his reign full of hope, popularity, and probably syphilis. But within months, Caligula went from emperor to human catastrophe. He executed senators for making eye contact. He accused the moon of mocking him. He promoted his horse to priesthood, not because he was whimsical, but because he genuinely believed animals were more trustworthy than humans. And then came the assassination attempts. Or rather, the rumors of them, because with Caligula, every slightly nervous look was an act of war. He began preemptively murdering people who he thought might try to kill him. Cousins, generals, former allies gone, just in case. One senator was executed for staying silent during a ceremony, because silence might mean plotting. Another was killed for laughing at the wrong joke. Caligula's favorite technique? Psychological warfare. He'd invite people to lavish dinners, toast to their health, then have them executed before dessert. Sometimes he'd whisper to guests, "I could have you killed right now," and then laugh while they wet themselves. He turned power into performance art and paranoia into the punchline. Eventually, his own guards had enough and stabbed him to death in a hallway. But not before he made one last decree, banning anyone from using the word goat because he thought it was a secret insult about his appearance. 3. Domitian, the man who turned mirrors into enemies. Imagine ruling an empire so large it included 3 continents and spending most of your time checking behind curtains to see if your assassin had arrived early. Welcome to the world of Emperor Domitian, the man who trusted statues more than senators and believed that mirrors might be spying on him. Domitian didn't just suspect betrayal, he industrialized it. He had palace walls lined with polished metal so he could watch people behind him while pretending to read reports. That's right. The man invented the ancient Roman version of a rear-view mirror just to avoid backstabbing. And yet, despite this, the backstabbing still came just much later than expected. Domitian was obsessed with omens. If lightning struck in the wrong direction or a bird chirped too loudly, he'd cancel meetings, execute messengers, or retreat into his private chambers for days. He once had an entire banquet hall cleansed with fire because he felt the aura was off. He banned certain astrologers for predicting his death, which, fun fact, still happened anyway. By the end of his reign, Domitian rarely appeared in public. He believed the Senate was plotting, the people were cheering too loudly, and even his hairdresser was a potential assassin. The only thing he truly trusted was his own reflection, which might be why he had hundreds of statues of himself commissioned. The man didn't just have trust issues, he had mirror issues. Eventually, one of his own slaves assassinated him, proving once again that if you suspect everyone is out to get you, well, sometimes you're just really, really right. 4. Nero, the emperor who thought everyone was an assassin, including his own shadow. Let's talk about Nero, the man, the myth, the walking, flaming red flag. You probably know him as the guy who fiddled while Rome burned. What you may not know is that Nero was so paranoid he made trust issues look like a lifestyle brand. At first, Nero was just a rich kid with mommy issues. His mum, Agrippina, basically stage-managed his rise to power like a helicopter parent directing a school play. She eliminated rivals, seduced senators, and may or may not have poisoned a few relatives to make her son emperor. And Nero, at first, he was grateful. Then he got suspicious, because in Nero's mind, anyone that powerful must eventually turn on him, even his own mother. So naturally, he tried to kill her. First attempt, poison, didn't work. She'd built up an immunity like a medieval princess with a stomach of steel. Second attempt, collapse her bedroom ceiling. Missed. Third attempt, trap her on a self-sinking boat. She swam to shore. At this point, Agrippina wasn't a mother, she was a mythological boss battle. Nero finally sent assassins to finish the job the old-fashioned way, with swords, and then he declared her death a suicide. Classic. After that, Nero went full HBO villain. He executed his wife for complaining, then married a boy who looked like her, and called it romantic. He had advisors stabbed mid-meeting. He forced poets to commit suicide for writing vaguely critical lines. At one point, he banned sarcastic applause at his public performances. Yes, the emperor performed on stage and executed people for not clapping hard enough. His nightmares got so bad that he'd sleep with guards in the room not to protect him, but to wake him if he started screaming. By the end, he didn't trust his generals, his guards, or even the wind direction. He had astrologers on retainer to check if a bad vibe was coming. Spoiler alert, the real bad vibe was Nero himself. Eventually, even the Senate had enough. When they declared him an enemy of the state, Nero fled Rome, dressed like a servant, and hid in a villa, muttering to himself. Surrounded by enemies, abandoned by his allies, he finally took his own life, but only after asking someone else to stab him because he was too nervous to do it wrong. Nero's last words, "What an artist dies in me." Paranoia and delusion all the way to the end. 5. Elagabalus, the glitter-coated, gender-bending god-king of chaos. If Rome had a rave scene, Elagabalus would have been the headliner, the DJ, and the fire hazard all in one. Crowned emperor, just 14, this teenage chaos engine turned the empire into a cross between a Vegas cabaret and a pagan cult, and then got terrified that everyone was out to stop the party. He declared himself the high priest of a sun god few Romans had heard of, forced the entire empire to worship a sacred black rock, and held religious orgies disguised as festivals. He married 5 women and 1 man in rapid succession, wore makeup in Senate meetings, and once offered a fortune to any physician who could surgically turn him into a woman. Elagabalus wasn't just rewriting gender norms, he was lighting them on fire and dancing in the ashes. But behind the glitter and gold-dusted chariots was a core of pure paranoia. Elagabalus executed people just for looking at him the wrong way, literally. His guards were instructed to monitor facial expressions and eliminate bad vibes. His chamber was filled with disguises and escape tunnels. He once changed sleeping quarters 7 times in one night to avoid assassination, and he made people swear oaths of loyalty to his god, then had them killed anyway, just to be sure they weren't faking it. The real kicker? He threw live animals at crowds during banquets, believing it would confuse potential assassins. Nothing says, "I trust no one," like releasing a tiger into a dinner party and calling it security. Eventually, his own grandmother had him assassinated. That's how far gone he was when Grandma says, "You know what? This kid's gotta go," and orders your execution. You've hit a level of instability few can achieve. 6. Caracalla, the emperor who turned paranoia into a public health crisis. Caracalla had the energy of a schoolyard bully, a warlord, and a psychology textbook, all rolled into one bad haircut. Born into a dysfunctional family of emperors, his paranoia was practically genetic, but he took it to nuclear levels. Step 1 in his rule: murder his own brother, Geta, in their mother's arms. Why? Because Geta was slightly more popular. Caracalla didn't just kill him, he erased him. Had his face removed from statues, coins, records, like the ancient Roman version of rage deleting someone from social media, except with chisels and blood. Then came the purges. Caracalla had Geta's friends, staff, and fans executed. Historians estimate over 20 people died in the wave of paranoia that followed, including poets, guards, librarians, and anyone who had the audacity to speak Geta's name out loud. Imagine if saying your ex's name could literally get you decapitated. He was so obsessed with loyalty that he created new elite guard units just to spy on the existing ones. He'd switch disguises and roam the streets at night, eavesdropping on conversations to root out dissent. If anyone made jokes even slightly about his rule, boom, execution. One guy was murdered for comparing Caracalla's hairstyle to a pineapple. But wait, the paranoia didn't just extend to people, he also mistrusted statues. According to Roman historians, he ordered the destruction of every image of Alexander the Great that didn't match his own appearance. Because heaven forbid someone admire a dead hero more than a living lunatic. Caracalla's death was ironically poetic. He stopped to pee on the side of a road during a military march, and one of his own guards stabbed him from behind. The moral of the story? When you're too paranoid to trust anyone, you probably shouldn't turn your back, ever. 7. Honorius, the emperor who feared chickens more than barbarians. Most emperors feared assassins. Honorius, he feared poultry-related grief. When the Visigoths sacked Rome in 410 AD, the first time in 800 years that the Eternal City fell to foreign invaders, Honorius didn't weep for the empire. He wept for his chicken. No, seriously. According to the ancient historian Procopius, when a messenger rushed in and breathlessly informed Honorius, Rome has perished. The emperor staggered back in horror. Then he said, "But she just ate from my hand this morning," mistaking the fall of Rome for the death of his favorite chicken, whom he had lovingly named Roma. This is the man who ruled the Western Roman Empire during its final, catastrophic decline. While cities were burning, legions deserting, and barbarians flooding the borders, Honorius was living in a fortified villa in Ravenna, playing with his pet birds and issuing edicts about the color of public performers' clothes. He banned gladiator fights, not because of violence, but because he was afraid someone might smuggle a sword in and assassinate him mid-show. He avoided Rome entirely. Paranoia? Absolutely. The idea of being physically close to the Senate, the people, or the ancient temples of power made him nervous. So he ruled from a swampy marsh city, surrounded by walls and whispers, staring at maps he didn't understand and naming chickens after dead cities. Honorius didn't just preside over the fall of Rome, he ignored it so hard it became inevitable. He feared the wrong enemies, and that, right there, might be the most terrifying paranoia of all. And so there they were, 7 men who ruled the greatest empire on earth, and yet couldn't rule the storm inside their own heads. They had armies, walls, gods, and gold, but they trusted none of it. They trusted no one. They ruled through fear, and were ruled by fear, and in the end, not one of them died peacefully in their beds. They were stabbed, poisoned, strangled, betrayed, or simply lost in their own madness, some by their friends, others by their families, and a few, spectacularly, by themselves. These emperors weren't just paranoid, they were proof that power, without peace of mind, is just a slow-moving curse in a purple robe. Their reigns were marked not by what they built, but by what they destroyed to feel safe. Their rivals, their bloodlines, their cities, their sanity. They didn't just kill conspirators. They killed trust. They killed the connection. They killed anything that reminded them they were still human. And maybe that's the real tragedy. Because Rome didn't fall in one day. It cracked under centuries of fear, suspicion, silence, and backstabbing, not by enemies at the gate, but by emperors too afraid to look their shadows in the eye. So, the next time someone tells you absolute power is the ultimate prize, remind them that for 7 emperors, it was the ultimate prison. And their ghosts? They're still pacing those marble halls, not looking for enemies, just making sure the doors are locked